I'll say good morning again, George. Okay. I forgot, George. Okay, we'll try this again. Good morning. Bom dia. Buenos dias. Buongiorno. Bonsoir. Bonjour. But can we say bonsoir as well? During the day. What happened to my language skills? So we do have a tight agenda, but I want to welcome and thank you all for coming. So we had planned for this meeting to have happened last month, but because of two snow incidences, yes, we postponed to today. And this was in response of immigration raids happening down in the south, and also in the political arena, some anti-immigrant sentiments. In Somerville, as a close community as we are, this is a community meeting where we'll hear from the mayor, so in behalf of the mayor, from the superintendent, from chief of police, reassuring to the immigrant community in Somerville of how much this is a special city and how close we are and how we value everybody in Somerville, regardless of who they are and where they come from. And to do the welcoming behavior in behalf of the mayor, we have Denise Taylor, Director of Communication, to welcome you all.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank you for coming out. The mayor was supposed to be standing right here to welcome you, but he got called down to a meeting on the Green Line extension, which is this little project we're trying to push through. So I just want to repeat what Regina said. So the impetus for this meeting is the concerns and fears that we have and that members of the community have around the ICE raids that began a couple of months ago. We are really pleased today to have Oscar Chacon here to speak to us so that we can get more information on how we can speak to the residents that we're serving in terms of knowing their rights in the event that they do find themselves in a situation where they are confronted by ICE or concerned. And you'll be hearing more from the chief of police and the superintendent as well. So I know that if the mayor was here, he would probably reemphasize to you that, you know, his own parents were immigrants. We are, you know, it is a personal thing for him, not just a job thing for him, to be sure that we remain a welcoming city. And we need to do everything that we can to be sure that whether someone has legal status or not, that they know that they are a valued part of this community, and they need to understand that we are not the ones that they need to be afraid of. So one of the things that we'll be doing is learning, but I hope that this session also works as somewhat of a workshop and that we get ideas from you, because I know that the chief will talk about this, that one of the key things that we want to be sure of is that people's regular lives are going on amidst the ICE concerns, which means that they may witness crimes, they may be subject to a crime, and we need to be sure that they don't keep it to themselves and not call the police during this. They need to understand that our police will not be referring anyone to ICE that calls us up to report a crime. We need to hear from you what we can do to help get that message out. That's really important today. And I'm not going to speak too much longer because we have a lot to get through, and I just want to thank everyone for being here. And I actually have to run into the other room because I also wound up with a double conflict conducting job interviews. So excuse me and thanks.
Thank you, Denise. I just want to take a minute and recognize some officials and elected officials here with us today, and thank you for coming. We have Lee Palmer, Ward 3 School Committee. We have Christine Barber, State Representative. And soon to make an entrance, getting his coffee steamed to me. I'll announce him when he comes in. And we also have the General Counsel of El Salvador, Alba Azucena. Thank you for coming. So next in the agenda, and to welcome you, I'll wait for Tim. State Representative Tim Toomey. And I now would like to call our Superintendent of Schools, Mary Skipper, for her welcome.
So first, welcome on behalf of the Somerville Public Schools and also from our school committee. You know, when I was very excited for this event the first time, and then the snow came in the way, so I'm equally excited for the event this time. And, you know, when I think about it, this entire community and the turning out of the entire community is exactly what we need to make sure that we're giving to our young people and our families the type of reassurances and information they need for their choice. It's actually since joining Somerville Public Schools in July and having grown up in the area, it's actually something I really love about Somerville and I think distinguishes it, which is that when we see a problem, we're not afraid to be upstanders. We're not afraid to come out and actually figure out how we can play a role in helping to support. You know, today I stand here as the leader of the public schools, which is a very serious charge. In addition to having some of my team here and a cabinet that I just left, I want you all to know that we're 100% supportive of every student that walks through our doors. That is our charge as public education. And, you know, fundamentally, that means that students feel safe physically, but also psychologically. And I think that's some of the conversation that we will have today as to how to further help our kids to get there. We're charged with a broad spectrum of academic support, social, emotional, physical, but that also extends to the families. And so, you know, we can't do our work alone in isolation with just the students. And so really all of you today and the roles that you play, whether it's, you know, in lawmaking or whether it is in enforcement or whether it is in the work you do in the nonprofit area, you really are helping to raise our children and to reach the families that we desperately need to reach. So I thank you for that. I had the opportunity several weeks ago to meet with Sarah and some of the teachers at the high school, and a really great, intelligent, outspoken group of our young people who are immigrants who were able to very much articulate, you know, what is it like for them? What are the questions that they have? What are the fears that they have every day? What are the fears that their family has? And what they need. And some of those were issues that were, you know, primitive in terms of the safety piece that we all sort of take for granted, but we shouldn't. And some of them range to, what do I do when I graduate? What if I don't have paperwork to go on to college? You know, what are my options? What are my options for work? So it really ran the gamut. But I think it opened an important dialogue with our young people that we need to have that commitment to continue. So I come here today to welcome you, but also to be a participant and to listen, because you have much to teach us as our students have to teach us as well. So thank you for coming, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Mary. Next, I would like to call Chief of Police, Chief Fellow.
So thank you for inviting me here today, and actually I appreciate the deputies coming up. So I just want to introduce you to Deputy Chief Steve Carabino, who runs our patrol division at the police department, and Deputy Chief Paul Trent, who represents and runs our investigative division. And the reason they're up here today is because it's the three of us that run the Somerville Police Department. We run it together, and we run it as a team. But amongst the three of us, we have the same common mission, that we're not going to allow any resident in the city of Somerville to live in fear. So, you know, that's vitally important to us. It's what we strive for every day. And in that vein, just about a month ago, I had the honor to testify with Denise Provost, who just walked in the door, on behalf of Centro Presente and the Mass Trust Act, and the importance of that, to a city like Somerville. We work closely with our federal partners. We have an officer assigned to Homeland Security. You know, we work closely with them, but they know the message that in Somerville, we support our undocumented immigrant population. We want them to thrive within the city of Somerville. You know, we can still do that and still work hand in hand with our federal partners and have a very strong relationship. Back in 2009, Somerville Police Department passed a general order that stated that we will not notify ICE for a civil detainer. We don't contact ICE when somebody is bringing in and they have a civil detainer. If it's murder, if somebody's a predator in our city, of course we're going to act on that, because this entire community benefits when that person is removed from the community. But if somebody's living in Somerville and they're working hard and they're trying to raise a family, it's our job as a police department to assist them at every level we can and ensure that they feel safe in our city. Back in 2014, the mayor issued an executive order directly from his office instructing the police department not to contact ICE on civil detainers. And we've been doing that, you know, really since 2009. So the bottom line with us as a police department is we realized early on, Steve has over 25 years experience in the police department. Paul has 25, I have close to 20, and we realized very early on, we all came up to the ranks in the city of Somerville, we're all born and raised in Somerville. The police department can't solve the issues, the public safety issues in Somerville. There's not one issue we can't solve, but when we work collaboratively with every member of our community, there's no problem that we can't solve. And our undocumented residents is one of that. So we're going to assist you every step of the way. Please educate us. We're open to suggestions, you know, open to advice, you know, and we're working very diligently every day to make sure that everybody in Somerville succeeds. So thank you for having us here today. Like the superintendent say, we're here to learn also. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, State Representative Denise Provo, for being here with us as well. Thank you so much. Thank you. So now we want to know who's in the room. So we're going to take 5 minutes, and you're going to say you're going to introduce yourselves, and including myself, and then say your name and where you work in your position, or who you're representing here today. But make it very short. I am Regina Berthold, and I'm the Parent Information Center Director for the Somerville Public Schools. I'm also the District Liaison for Homeless Students and the Multilingual Services Coordinator. We can start on this side. Erica? Oh, okay, go ahead. Christine. Thank you. So a great diverse group of people, and now to lead us into a conversation, I want to ask Oscar Chacon from Alianza Americas, Americas that used to be NALAC? NALAC, I'll let him spell out what NALAC is. I won't try to attempt it. But also, what's our message to our Somerville immigrant community, and what are their rights? That is, as an immigrant and as someone who in the first 3-4 years lived under fear, you always don't know what the day will bring. But when you are in a place that, it's reassuring that whomever is around supports you, whomever you are as a human being, as a citizen, I think that makes a difference. And I think that's the message that we want to continue giving to the immigrant community. And this is the conversation that, what some of the underlying feeling is that for some immigrants is that, I'm here undocumented. I know I don't have any rights, and that's not right. people do have rights and want to make sure that people know about their rights. So to lead us into this conversation, I would like to invite our guest speaker who's here from Chicago. Few days in Massachusetts, he came the last time, and regardless of the cancellation, we had a meeting with him, and he's so committed that he came back for Somerville in Chelsea, and here with us today, please welcome Oscar Chacon.
Well, good morning, everyone. As I said, my name is Oscar Chacon. It's really good to see many folks I've known over many years, so it's great to be back in the Boston area. I was surprised at the cancellation the last time because I don't remember Boston being so much of a wimp when it comes to snow. I live in Chicago now, but we actually don't get much snow as you guys do lately. So. And I'm formerly from here, so I know what I'm talking about. I mean, my kids never missed school because of a snow day. I wish they had, but they didn't. I'm from El Salvador. I was born and raised there. I actually came to the U.S. in 1980. So I've been for most of my life actually living in the United States of America. And I want to begin by actually telling you how thankful I am for the work that you all help to do here in Somerville. I think in many ways Somerville is leading the way that the nation should follow in as far as how to resolve the question of how do we want to treat people who are part of our communities. And I think that is a challenge, a challenge in a time when life, for most people, not just immigrants, but for most people, has been getting tougher, has been getting harder, to live in a way that make us all feel realized, satisfied, happy. The reality is that, as studies tell us, life for most people, because of all the changes that have occurred in areas of public policy that have nothing to do, with immigration, most people do not feel, nowadays that they are living lives that are truly, truly fulfilling. And that is the condition that has been gradually taking root, and it is the condition in which, sadly, the debate about how to treat people who are born in the country, and especially people who do not have visas, immigration visas, to be here, should be treated. And let me actually begin by addressing something that most of you will probably relate very easily to. There are two issues, two areas of public policy that are very often confused, in the way we talk about immigrants. One is immigration policy. Immigration policy, if I had to reduce it to its simplest expression, is the rule of laws that help determine a country what foreigners and under what conditions should they come, to a given nation. That's what immigration policy, in its simplest expression, really is. What do you do with population once they are in the country is not really immigration policy. That is actually immigrants' policy. It is the question of how do you decide to treat people who are part of your communities, who are part of your neighborhoods. Our nation talks a lot about the former, about immigration. And we talk about it in a way, frankly, that is very erratic, very ahistorical, in the sense that it denies the fact that this country would not exist if it weren't for foreign nationals, people who weren't born, who weren't part, of this particular land, but that have made this country, their adopted country over many, many, many years. But when it comes to the latter, what to do about immigrants, we actually don't really have good models. And this is why I'm going back to what I said earlier. I think places like Somerville can be very helpful in leading the way, showing how people should be treated, irrespective, to their immigration status. And I want to be particularly thankful for the fact that we have here the leaders of the Somerville Police Department, because one of the misrepresentations, in the way we talk about the issue of immigration, is to suggest that somehow immigrants make communities unsafe. Immigrants make communities more violent, more crime-ridden, when in reality, every single study that you can look at shows actually the opposite. That there is no correlation between significant presence of foreign nationals in a given community and crime rates. As the chief of police here can testify to it, crime altogether has been actually decreasing in the United States of America, pretty consistently over the past 15 or so years. And violent crimes have also decreased. And again, the American Immigration Council in particular produces a yearly study looking at the intersection of crime and immigration. And again, you can just Google it and you'll find it. I don't need to tell you how to find it, but it is pretty clear. There is no relationship between presence of immigrants and crime, which takes me to the one issue that in many ways trigger one of the latest chapters in the conversation about immigration. And I'm talking about the fact that beginning, frankly, in about 2012, the number of Central American children and adults attempting to come into the United States, without visas, began to increase. Now, the number really took off, in extreme proportions in the spring of 2014. You may recall that the situation became so alarming that President Obama actually characterized it as a crisis, as an immigration crisis, which is really questionable, because if the arrival of about 160,000 people in 1 year puts our country in crisis, then we better really look at our parameters, for crisis, because that's not really a number that should lead, to a crisis. It is characterized as a crisis only because, again, the existing context in which the conversation about immigration and immigrants, and especially about people who look more and more like refugees, has gotten so incredibly complicated, so incredibly toxic, in the political environment we are in, especially when we have presidential candidates really rocking the boat in the wrong way, about these issues. And so I think that the question of what happened, to people who began coming in larger and larger numbers in the spring of 2014 all the way to the present, should at the very least lead us to ask a simple question: why are they coming? Especially because if you have not been paying attention, the pathway, by land to get from Central American countries all the way to the US has really become a hell path. I mean, it is horrible. Just to give you an idea, 7 of every 10 women who do that trail, from Central American countries all the way to the US, expect to be raped at least once in that trail, from Central America all the way to the US. Children often disappear. They are lost in the way never to be found. There is an increasing number of families in Central America, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, who always wonder why is it that their relatives never got in contact with them again. They assume, that they made it to the US and they just never called back. Wrong reality. I mean, what most likely happened is that those people were caught in the wrong networks, in their way and end up dead and buried, in a grave, God knows where. And of course, their families never get to know. So what I'm pointing is that the actual path to get from Central American countries to here is simply horrible. The reality of crime, impunity, Mexican, both criminals and sometimes authorities make this a hellish, experience. And so the question again is, if it is so bad, if it is so hard, to get to this country that way, what is it that drives people to come? And the answer is not simple, because the answer to that question really would take us an entire morning to try to begin to dissect. But let me just say that there are 3 or 4 conditions that explain why people are coming. The first condition, and the one what we have gotten used to, is that these countries are extremely impoverished nations. Countries where historically, if we complain about, wealth and income inequality in the U.S., well, welcome to permanent reality in these countries. That historically has been the case, okay? So there is no opportunity, to speak of for the majority of people to fully realize their expectations in life. Second of all, these countries, for multiple reasons that I don't have time to go into, have been gradually becoming nations that are within the top 10 most violent countries in the world. If you actually follow the news, the U.S. State Department announced not long ago, literally weeks ago, that no Americans should travel to Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador unless they really have to. Why? Because it's so dangerous. In 2012, the State Department decided to pull out from Honduras the Peace Corps program. They just recently announced the same thing for El Salvador because it is so dangerous and violent. And the third factor that I can also tell you plays a role is the fact that beginning more or less at the time I came to the U.S., several 100,000 people did the same thing I did. We came to the U.S. because we thought it was the only safe place we could go to. We have taken roots, in the U.S., and many of those people that are now coming, many of those children that are now leaving, want to be together with their mom, their dad, their family. And so family reunification also plays a role in why these people are coming here and not going someplace else. Because sometimes, I get into conversations with people who tell me, well, but if they were really running away from danger, why didn't they go to Panama? Why didn't they go to Colombia? Well, the answer is really simple if you think about it. They have no roots. They have no connections, to those countries. They do have connections here. And again, that goes back to what I said earlier. Our immigration policy has been broken forever. It's been really broken for most of the past 35 or so years. And I have to say, I don't believe that solution to that problem is in sight. Given the way the debate goes on in Washington, the level of gridlock that there is, does not make me hopeful that we will be able to tackle that problem in the short term. Now, let me come back to what happened on December 23rd, 2015. News filtered that the U.S. government, specifically the Department of Homeland Security, was planning to conduct raids against people, meaning children and mothers, for the most part, that had been given a hearing to show up, for their deportation proceedings, did not show up, and therefore were issued a deportation order, a final deportation order in absentia, okay? We actually thought that they were kidding, when they made this announcement, because, as I said, the condition of violence in these countries has not been getting any better. It's been getting worse. And so it didn't make any sense to many of us, who are on the side of advocating for people who deserve to be here based on the reality that they were trying to run away from, and because of our humanitarian laws, and because of our commitment to be supposedly protective precisely of people in those circumstances. But it is true. I mean, the decision had already been made. It was sad, I mean, that it was released on the 23rd of December, almost like a dark Christmas gift, to Central American families. And on January 2nd, the raids actually began. And they were focused primarily in 3 states, Texas, North Carolina, and Georgia. But they have continued, and they have been taking place in other parts of the country. By the end of February, according to the Department of Homeland Security, 336 people had already been arrested and deported, as a result of this raids campaign. This number includes some folks that are not necessarily Central American, but the vast majority are Central American children and mothers who, again, were the target of these raids. Sometimes, the ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement agents are knocking doors at 5 a.m., scaring people, scaring, neighborhoods. And sadly, this does not seem to be heading to a halt. I mean, everything that we've heard suggests to us that DHS remains committed, to this initiative. Now, we believe that the reason they're doing it is because of, frankly, ill-conceived notions that they need to show how tough the Obama administration can be against so-called lawbreakers. Now, let me just say that these kids and mothers who did not show up for the immigration hearings, it's not that they don't have credible cases. What that really reflects is the fact that there is no way our current legal support system, especially in the nonprofit community, is capable, not even by a long shot, to actually provide adequate legal representation to all those people. It is a proven fact that when people do get, quality representation, up to 76% of them end up getting relief in the U.S. But when they don't have a lawyer, of course, I mean, they are either fearful and they don't show up, or if they show up, they don't know how to argue their cases. And of course, I mean, they're going to be ordered deported. But the worst people can do is not show up at all. Because if they don't show up at all, then a deportation order is indeed issued in absentia, as I said. And that is what supposedly the Department of Homeland Security is doing, going after people who did not show up, and therefore in absentia deportation orders were issued. Now, we also know that if we were to really want to provide protection, there are ways to do it. The U.S. government, the U.S. law system has something called temporary protected status, which is very fitting, for a circumstance like this. But once again, I think it's mostly political considerations that is preventing the Obama administration from actually using these existing mechanisms in our current laws. Let me end by saying that it is very important that communities like Somerville stand up, and actually tell unequivocally how committed a city like Somerville is to actually do the right thing, for these kind of communities. I believe that the fact that there is a policy of no collaboration with, when it comes to immigration retainers, is a great thing, because for police, anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, actually, to do their job effectively, it is absolutely imperative to count with the confidence, the trust of the community they are supposed to serve and protect. When that doesn't happen, even if it is for a certain segment of the community, then the chance to fully realizing that role becomes significantly imperiled. And so the fact that there is indeed a policy of no collaboration is great. I wish the entire state of Massachusetts had it. I know it's a long shot, but I believe, that there are committed people in the state of Massachusetts to push the envelope when it comes to this issue. And let me just really end by saying, I didn't tell you at the beginning, the organization I work for, Alianza Americas, until recently was actually known as the National Alliance of Latin American and Caribbean communities. You can guess why we changed the name. Such a long name, nobody ever remember. So now we are called Alianza Americas. We are a national umbrella under which many immigrant-led organizations come together. We serve both as a national resource center for our organizational members, and we also serve as a joint platform from where to do policy advocacy work, both in the United States of America, but also in our countries of origin. My organization believes firmly that creating conditions for people to feel fully realized in the places they were born is actually a duty of good governments. And that's why we also hold accountable, governments in our countries of origin, because by and large, they have systematically failed to bring about the conditions, to create the conditions that allow for people to really feel fully realized by staying in their own countries. But with that said, let me also say, the majority of people in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, do not want to come to the United States of America. Contrary to what Mr. Trump may think, the reality is most people are very happy in their own country, in spite of the challenges that we face. The reality is weather is a lot more generous than it is here. Food is a lot more tasty than it is here. And I can tell you just the social interaction that goes on in our countries, it's a lot warmer than it is often the case here. If you ever go visit, you'll be convinced, that those countries are indeed beautiful places from which it is a shame that anybody feels they have to live in order to be safe. So I look forward to any questions you may have. I know that I mostly kept my comments in a very national, international context, but I hope I help shed some light, but I'll be happy to entertain questions and will do my best to answer if I can. Thank you very much.
Do you want to stay here, Oscar, for questions? So we now, we'll take 5-7 minutes. We did start a little late, so 5-7 minutes for questions and answer. And Oscar, when they ask the questions, just because we are on TV, did I tell you we're on TV?
No,
Okay.
it's okay.
We just repeat the answer, the question, so that can be heard.
Sounds good.
Thank
All right. All right, so then questions. Yes. Just to repeat the question, since you asked me to do it, she was affirming how hard it is, the experience of moving from one country to another when it comes to borders in particular. But then the specific question is, what can we do to be of best support to children that most likely, and indeed they are, traumatized, when they arrive to this country, to communities like Somerville. Let me begin by saying that I told you, I've been living most of my life in the U.S., and I know, as a matter of fact, how much our schools have gradually been losing, the capacity to be more helpful to all students. I remember that my kids, used to go to school in Cambridge. and they went to this program called Amigos, which I don't know if it still operates. But I was blown away because in the classroom, they had a teacher assistant full-time, and no class was more than 20 kids. And there were counselors, in the school, in case there was any need, for any intervention. I moved from here to California. Not even to Southern California, but to Northern California, which is supposed to be the better part of California. My kids went to school there. The classroom was nearly 60 students per classroom. And there was one teacher, no counselors, okay? So in school conditions like that, how can you be supportive, of children that are traumatized, that are coming from a foreign land, that don't speak the language? Believe me, I really understand, the challenges. And I really hate to say it, but in trying to help children like the Central American children who have come, in recent years, we need to always keep in mind that we really need to advocate for better school support for all students, at the same time that we argue for this particular, especially in need children. And I can tell you for sure, that these kids are indeed traumatized. If life were entirely, driven by a negative perspective, they would probably grow up having all sorts of challenges, as young adults, as adults, because of all the trauma that they experience. But on the other hand, let me also say, because I've seen it before, resilience in these communities is amazing. When you think of the fact that people have endured the kind of trauma that they have endured, and they turn out to be successful members of our community, it's really amazing, given the fact that we don't always have, the adequate support to be there for them. And so my advice would be to do the best you can to gather whatever resources, there may be available in a community like Somerville, but always keep in mind that the larger picture is one where we need to build far better schools, far better educational experiences for all kids, irrespective to whether they are US-born, citizens or not. Because otherwise, we run the risk of creating this rift between, and I told you, I saw it in Chicago myself, many African-American mothers saying, why are we going to take children from Central America, that are coming with all sorts of troubles, when in my school, my kids don't have access to the support they need. And again, that's the wrong way of looking at the issue. I think we need to look at the issue from the perspective of how do we build better schools, better support for children across the board. Yes, sir. Yes. Very happy to know. I'll let my kids know. One is 27 and the other one is 33 now, but they still remember the Amigos program. So great. Thank you for the update. Appreciate it. Any other questions or comments? Either I didn't say anything that was understood, or you guys know everything. Good. Mm-hmm. We'll be happy to. First of all, let me say that one lesson we have learned over the last several years, dealing with the Central American refugee-like situation, which does involve, to a significant degree, unaccompanied children. And the one, I would say the main lesson we've learned is how obsolete, how inadequate our humanitarian protection laws are. We absolutely need to reform, not to make them worse, but to make them more realistic in their capacity to be truly protective, truly supportive of people, especially children, who are running away for their lives, literally. For example, I was just telling you that if a child or a adult does manage to get access to knowledgeable, proven, experienced representation, legal representation, that they are more likely, to be able to find a remedy to their situation. But that's not to suggest that political asylum laws or any other humanitarian protection laws as currently structured are actually silver bullets for them to be able to stay in the country safely. So that's one thing that we've learned, that we need to work, and this is more of a medium to long-term task, are actually making our laws be better when it comes to acknowledging the fact that, for example, in Central American countries, it is not necessarily government forces, who are exercising the conditions that lead people to want to leave, to fear for their lives, and therefore, they leave. It is often actually irregular forces like gangs or narco-trafficking entities. Second of all, we've also learned that our government has a very short memory. If we go back to much earlier years, there are even legal requirements that our government committed back in the 1980s, not to do. For example, there should never have been any families with children in detention centers for more than 48 hours. And yet, we all saw the images, back in 2014 of children sleeping on the floor, feeling cold. That's inhumane. And not only inhumane, but it's in violation of actual legal agreements that the US government made back in the 1980s related precisely to Central American immigrants and refugees who were coming to the country back then. That means also that we need to be better at advocating for our government to actually live up to its obligations. Clearly, we were not that successful. There are still to this day families in detention, sadly, in detention centers in Texas. And the US government, meaning the Obama administration, refuses to actually comply with court orders that says that those families should be released because it's in violation of existing agreements. They are appealing, those decisions by a judge in California. So I think that we continue to have this huge challenge of how to ensure, that these children actually get, the right kind of protection. We are very strongly advocating, as strongly as we can, and I invite you actually to help us in that respect. We believe that in spite of the political impediments that come with an electoral campaign, but also with the mindset regarding immigration policy that even the Obama administration embraces, that there is reluctance, to actually grant temporary protected status. We believe that that is a way of solving this issue without putting people through the difficulties of having to find an attorney, because temporary protected status does not require that people actually get themselves represented by a lawyer. It's really an administrative procedure. And by the way, TPS does not mean that if somebody has a credible, strong case to argue for political asylum, that they can no longer do it. If they were to get TPS, they can still pursue, their political asylum case. So I don't know if I answered your question the way you expected me to, but that's the best I can do. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, actually, there is a petition by change.org right now. It's actually, I believe it's called Rebecca's Story, Rebecca with one C. And it's actually a young woman from here, from Boston, the one that is featured in this particular petition. By last Friday, it had gathered about 43,000 signers, of this petition addressed to President Obama, asking for TPS to be granted. You can also speak, to your local elected officials. You can also speak with your school administrators, with your health center administrators, with leaders in communities of faith, to actually write letters addressed to President Obama, copy to Jed Johnson, the Secretary of Homeland Security, asking for TPS to be granted for these Central American children, mothers, families. TPS in the end depends on the level of will, political will, to do it. The law is very clear. The law was created in 1990. I actually was very involved in the fight that led to the passage of the temporary protected status law in September of 1990. And it basically puts the decision on the lap of the president. And the conditions in Central America now, especially with the announcements by the State Department to pull out the Peace Corps program and the decision to warn Americans not to travel, they themselves have evidence that it would be unwise, unsafe to send these people back. And yet, they're doing it. Because somehow, life of people from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador seems to be less than lives, of Americans that may be planning to travel. So again, these are ways in which you all can help. It's about building the political will, to use existing law. Frankly, I do not believe that if President Obama were to grant TPS, that he will be hated more by the people who already hate him. Do you allow two? Just kidding. Just kidding. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, again, I am a firm believer of putting always the way we treat immigrants in the context of how are we treating citizens, how are we treating people all across, America, if you want. We all are familiar with the so-called war on drugs. And the war on drugs has been an extremely profitable business for lots of large corporations, and two in particular. Correctional Corporations of America and the GEO Group, who have been building jails, forever, and really getting a lot of money, for keeping people in jail. Well, that practice early on extended to immigrant detention centers. These companies collect, on the average, $150 a night per bed that they used in their facilities. So the U.S. Congress, to make it easier that they actually make a lot of money on a yearly basis, also passed a requirement that there should be, at any given night, 34,000 beds available for the Department of Homeland Security to use. That's still going today. Now, for every one of those beds, as I said, they are getting in the neighborhood of $150 a night. So that's a big incentive to actually keep people in detention facilities. Now, it turns out that in CCA-run facilities, when instead of having a single person, a single adult, in detention, for which they get about $150 a night, they actually bring in a mother and a child, that counts as a family. That means they get $600 a night for keeping a mom and a kid together in a detention facility. So clearly, there is indeed a profit-making incentive to keep going with these policies. Now, I believe that whether it is intentional or not, the Obama administration drive to actually go after these families, hold them, and keep them in detention is feeding into this particular addiction, of basically getting profits as a result of putting people in pain. I mean, that is sadly something that still goes on and that we need to change. No question about that. As I said, how soon can we change it? It's a very different proposition, because of the fact that the Congress, even in this upcoming election, is still very unlikely that it will change hands. And for as long as the Congress remains firmly in the hand of the party that it now holds control, chances are we are not going to really see much changes coming through in the near future. Now, on the second question, which is kind of unrelated to the Central American issue, but related to the broad question of immigration status, President Obama did grant 2 administrative relief programs, among many things that he actually announced on the 20th of November 2014. But he announced a program called Defer Action for Parents of American Citizens and Permanent Residents, also known as DAPA, D as in David, A, P as in Peter, A, DAPA. He also announced an expansion of a program that they had actually originally granted in the summer of 2012 called Defer Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. And the expansion basically had to do with modifying the qualification criteria to make possible for more people to be able to benefit from these particular relief programs. What do these relief programs give an immigrant? They give them the right not to be deported, so long as they don't commit any crime for which they would be deported, and they will also get a work authorization document as a benefit, for them. Now, these 2 programs, DAPA and DACA Expanded, were the object of a lawsuit, filed back in the beginnings of 2015. The lawsuit was successful in actually placing an injunction so that the programs could not be implemented, and that remains the case to this date. Now, the case has followed, the path of most legal proceedings in the U.S. Legal system, and it is now scheduled for oral arguments before the Supreme Court on the 18th of April this year. Now, you all know about the passage of Judge Scalia. Justice Scalia is no longer, in the Supreme Court, and we don't have any certainty about how the Supreme Court will actually decide, this particular case. Now, it's important to know that the federal court in Texas sided with Texas, meaning the program cannot be implemented. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals sided with Texas, meaning the program cannot proceed. So if the Supreme Court sides with Texas, the program is gone, probably forever. And it may even open up a Pandora box in terms of challenging other programs like, the expansion of DACA and DAPA. If the Supreme Court actually end up evenly split 4-4, it still goes back to the Fifth Circuit Court being affirmed, which means the program doesn't go anywhere. The only scenario in which the court can decide that would be beneficial for immigrant communities is if the decision turned out to be a 5-3 decision, meaning 5 judges side with the administration, 3 judges side, with Texas. That would be good, because then the program would go forward and we could see implementation of it as early as August of this year. If the decision were even better, if it were 6-2, same thing, But all I'm saying is that the magic number is really 5-3, because only a 5-3 decision will mean that the programs can be implemented as early as August of this year. The last thing I'll say about DACA, DAPA, and the likelihood of what may happen at the Supreme Court, if it ends up being a split decision 4-4, what it does mean is that the next government assuming it is a democratic government, which we don't know, could decide to appeal anew and begin the process again, okay? If it is a 4x4 decision at the Supreme Court. So to the best of my knowledge, that's where we stand. And as I'm sure you all know, you may be wondering what can we do to influence the Supreme Court. It's very hard to influence the Supreme Court other than, again, communicating as broadly as one can that the wisest, most generous decision would be to support the administration on this particular case. I haven't gone into the specifics of what the case relies on, what are the issues that are at stake, but that's essentially where we are. So thank you, and if I did not answer as thoroughly as you wanted me to, I'm staying here and we can talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. I want to say we do have a police immigrant dialogue group that meets regularly. And Sonadera, I would like you to speak about the group. Just quickly, when the next meeting, what is, if people do not know about the group, I think it's a venue that we all come together and talk about local issues happening in the immigrant community.
Thank you, Regina. So the Immigrant Police Dialogue Session is convened by the Human Rights and Multicultural Affairs Commission and supported by the Women's Commission through the Office of Commissions, Health and Human Services Department. And we meet in the Public Safety Building. It's a stakeholders meeting, and so it's every quarter. The next meeting will be May 9th. And we call it Immigrant Police Dialogue Stakeholders. You can talk with me. I have my business card, and I can give it to you, and you can get onto the list. The list tells you when the next meetings are. It also kind of shares other immigrant information. So if Regina sends out some information or other colleagues send something, we share that. So it's a little bit of information as well as a reminder of the events co-convened with the Chief of Police. Thank you very much. And please see me if you'd like to join that list. Thank you.
So this is such a great conversation in 1 hour. I'm sorry we went over the time, but it's great to hear from Oscar. And more meetings like this should take place. And everybody was so having fun networking this morning. That tells you that we miss this kind of meetings for networking. We also have a community leadership resource team, which we call the CRT. Which next meeting is this coming Friday. It's from 8 to 10, SFLC conference room in the Cummings building. It's a meeting where a lot of the providers, we want all the providers to come together so we can network. A lot of you already in the audience is part of this group. So that's a place to learn from each other what we're doing locally, what each one of us do, and to learn from each other as well. So next meeting, this Friday, Community Leadership Resource Team, 8 o'clock. It's a challenge, 8 o'clock on a Friday, but it's a great, we meet 4 times a year. Irma?
So thank you for having here. I think this is a really interesting conversation, and probably we need to continue this kind of conversation, how we can support our communities, and especially at the local level. So you all are invited. We can continue the conversation. You have our information, so you can contact us anytime. So thank you for being here, and if you have any other question, I think Oscar, Regina, and we will be here. Thank you for coming.